Welcome back to Homesteading with the Zimmermans, where we work hard and play hard on our little corner of land in Iowa. My husband and I were born and raised Old Order Mennonite, or horse and buggy Mennonite, as some refer to them as. And although we are no longer part of that culture or community, we are intentional about passing on the old-fashioned skills of our childhood to the next generation. Hello, everybody. This is my husband, Alvin, and I am Ruth Ann Zimmerman. We are Homesteading with the Zimmermans. And today we are going to do a YouTube video together that we have talked about for probably a year. We've talked about this video for at least a year, and we are finally going to do it. This week is Iowa's shotgun deer season. And so Elvin has Monday and Tuesday off in case he didn't get his deer, but he got a deer on Saturday. So he's been helping me around the homestead yesterday and today. And today's project is to film this cast iron video. So long story short, you might be where we are with your cast iron, or where we were as newlyweds with our cast iron, because both of us grew up with our moms using cast iron, primarily using cast iron for their frying pans. And when we got married, we got a cast iron pan for a wedding gift. And I kept thinking that it isn't properly seasoned because it did not work like my mom's did. And we struggled with this for quite a few years until I finally hung the cast iron on a nail, and we bought a real expensive nonstick cookware. And in a matter of 3 short years, we had gone through 3 of these nonstick pans. Going through these pans so fast brought us back to the durability of the cast iron. And one day I was at my mom's house and I saw her cast iron, and I had a light bulb moment. So this is the cast iron that my mom was cooking on, and she let me borrow it for this video. And I noticed that the bottom of her cast iron, number 1, was as smooth as glass. And the other thing is, it was really light and thin. So this is when I started asking around at flea markets. I'd find a vendor that looked like he was passionate about cast iron, and I'd start picking up cast iron and asking him questions. And what I learned about the vintage cast iron is they are completely different than the modern day cast iron like the Lodge. So my mom's is a Wagner, which is a vintage cast iron. So this is a Wagner, Sydney, and then they have numbers on. This is a size 8. But what I realized is that there's a huge difference between the modern cast iron that I owned and the vintage ones that my mom owned. Number 1, the modern was so... I almost knocked you out, didn't I? The modern ones are so heavy. They're so heavy because they're so thick. There's so much iron in each pan. Now this one, of course, is a lot bigger than my mom's, but it's still a lot heavier. So now you might notice that this one is as smooth as glass now. So what we did, instead of putting our modern cast irons, selling them, and buying the vintage ones, what did we do? We remodeled, reconstructed, resurfaced our modern cast irons to the point where they work like the vintage ones. Now they're still much heavier and more awkward to handle, but the cooking surface works like the vintage cast iron. So that is what we're going to show you today. I wanted to show you one more of my favorite pans. Can you show me that one? So I have since picked up some smaller vintage ones for my cooking needs at flea markets. But this big round one that I showed you, because we do a lot of cooking. So this is one of my most used pans. And then can you hold that one? And this is another one of my most used pans. So this one goes across 2 burners on my glass top cook stove. And the brand is Carolina Cooker, and I will link this pan in the description. Now, all of you that go and buy this pan, I want you to put a note and tell Carolina Cooker to contact me, because I've been selling this pan for them for the last 2 years, and I know hundreds of you have bought this pan, and I keep reaching out to them saying, hey, do you have an affiliate program? This is a pan that I can really get behind, and I cannot get them to respond to me. This one, when we bought it, it came with little pegs as legs on the bottom, and Elvin just filed those off. But I've heard from recent customers that you can now have the option to buy it with legs or without legs. So I don't know for a fact if that is true, but when we got this one, Elvin, he resurfaced it, and it works amazingly. So the one downside to this, it is very heavy. And I'm also going to address, most people think that they cannot use their cast iron on their glass top cook stove. This is because the danger of dropping them could break your glass top cook stove. But if you're like me, you just know to be very careful with your heavy cast irons on your glass top. And I've been using cast iron on my glass top cook stove for the last 15-20 years without a problem. Okay, so the reason that this video has finally made it this far is because for Christmas this year, both our older daughters, one who is already married and has her own home, and one who's getting married in February, put a cast iron pan on their Christmas wish list. And before you start panicking and thinking that they're gonna see this video and know what they're getting for Christmas, know that it's okay. They asked for a cast iron, and I said, sure, I'll get you a cast iron. And Elvin will, Dad will resurface it for you, and I will season it for you and get it all ready. So that's what we're going to do today. So they are both getting a brand new Lodge cast iron. This seems really big for newlyweds, doesn't it?
It's large. It's very large. It's 15 inch. Normally they're 12 inch.
So I'm sure they'd rather have a pre-seasoned pan than have the stickers on it. So that's what we're going to do today. Elvin's going to resurface these. And at a flea market, one time at one of the flea market vendors where I started asking questions, he told me something about Lodge, and I have since researched it and found it to be true, that in the early 2000s, Lodge started pre-seasoning their cast irons by spraying on a soy-based vegetable oil. And that is contrary to everything that our grandmas knew about cast iron, and that was you need animal fats to season your cast iron. And the other reason that Lodge is a very popular brand of cast iron is because it's affordable for you and I. But what that also means is that it is lesser quality. Like, it's not the more expensive cast irons that you can buy cast irons, and I can't think of any of the brands off the top of my head, but there is American-made companies that spend a lot of time and effort making beautiful cast irons that are as smooth as glass. And those are more expensive. They're like $400 compared to $40 for a Lodge cast iron. But there's a reason they are so expensive, is because it takes time and effort to get this surface as smooth as glass. So we're going to take these 2 large cast irons, and I'm going to let Elvin tell you what tools he's going to use to get this job accomplished today.
So on your new Lodge skillet, if you run your fingers across it, you can feel it's not very smooth. And that's because of the cheap sand casting they did, not like years ago when they were smooth as glass. But we can change that with a little elbow grease and the right tools. So first of all, I'm going to start with a 4.5-inch angle grinder and a what I call a flap disc. It is a 80 grit for starters. That's step one. I'll go around on the inside and smooth it out. And then I'll step up to the 120 grit and take that one around on the inside. And then to remove any marks, I've got this other very fine scrubber pad. I don't know if you can see in there.
I can link all of these. I can link all of these different wheels in the description for you.
But basically, you're just going to go around and get the bottom of the pan smooth up to the corners. I really don't go up the sides a whole lot, but you want to make sure the bottom is nice and smooth as glass.
And then what are you going to use that thing for?
Oh, and if you have any trouble with getting the small corners, I've got a small sanding disc on my drill that will fit the smaller spots.
All right, you ready to get started?
Mm-hmm.
Please note that although Elvin did remove the safety shield from his grinder for this job, it is recommended that you never operate these hand tools without their safety shield firmly in place. So Elvin says that if you do not have the tools or the inspiration to do this yourself, a machinist could do this resurfacing job for you. So would you say the 80 grit mostly takes off the seasoning that they sprayed on?
No, the 80 grit will take off actual casting, the rough high spots of casting. It does, the majority of the work is done with the first step, and that's removing all the high spots. Okay, now that we've got step one pretty much down, I've used 80 grit, a flap disc sander on my angle grinder, and I've ground off all the high spots, and I've got it fairly good, but I can still make it a lot smoother by using the next size up to a finer 120 grit. And now I'm going to hit it with a 120 grit. Get it a little smoother, get rid of some of the marks that the 80 grit left. Don't forget your glasses. Okay, you want to see the difference? I'll show you the difference.
So the pans look very different right now, but with usage, the resurface one will turn dark again.
I know it doesn't look very smooth, but
Wow,
a huge difference. I mean, now try this one, huh?
It's like glass, it really is.
That one's like the Rocky Mountains.
Yeah.
There's a big difference. I also did the edges a little bit. It's easier on you.
So now that Elvin has polished it all up, I'm going to give it a good washing. So now I'm just going to wipe this all dry and clean until I can't see any more dirt coming off of it. So I am wearing a new apron. I did not sew this apron. A sweet YouTube subscriber used my pattern and made me an apron, and it is so cute. She made a couple little modifications. She made the pockets a little differently, and she made it a little shorter than the pattern, but I am really loving it. Thank you so much. So I've got the burner turned on, and this is lard from our pigs. Now, animal fat is the best for seasoning a cast iron. You can use bacon grease. If you don't have access to lard, you can save your bacon grease and use that, or you can use tallow, which is fat from cows. I turned my burner on to melt my lard so I can get it all over the pan. And I've got my oven preheating to 350 degrees. So I've turned my burner off and my lard is all melted. I'm just gonna use this dry towel and I'm gonna rub this all over the inside. So now that my oven is at 350 degrees, I am going to take my pan, I'm going to turn my oven off. Preheat it to 350 degrees, I'm going to turn it off, and I'm going to put this cast iron pan upside down in the oven. I am going to close the oven and let it cool down until it's room temperature, and then I'll start the process over. And so turn your oven to 350, preheat it to 350, turn it off, and put your greased pan in the oven upside down until your oven's cool. So let's do a little side-by-side cooking in these two new cast irons, one which has been refinished and one which hasn't. And we are going to cook the trickiest thing to cook in cast iron, and that is scrambled eggs. Now, cooking scrambled eggs should not usually be a problem in your cast iron unless it's not properly seasoned, or if you have a modern cast iron that has a very rough surface. Eggs soak up all the seasoning and grease in a cast iron. So making only scrambled eggs morning after morning after morning in your cast iron is going to create a problem. So you do need to re-season your cast iron often if you are only making eggs. When I cook something real greasy like bacon or sausage or even beef in my cast iron, in between batches of eggs, I don't usually have to re-season it. But if you're only using your cast iron for eggs, you're going to have to re-season it every morning. So now we're pouring our scrambled eggs into the pan, and it's not hard to tell the difference between the two pans. One has factory seasoning, the other one has been resurfaced and seasoned with lard by Elvin and I. So what happens when you season a cast iron pan is that grease or animal fat soaks into the tiny little crevices and cracks in the cast iron, and that fat that builds up in those crevices and cracks creates a non-stick surface. So because the surface of the factory cast iron is so rough, it would take hundreds of hours of cooking greasy food in it to fill all of that in until it is smooth and creates the same amount of non-stick as a higher quality pan that has a much, much smoother surface. So a couple other tips when you're making scrambled eggs in cast iron is make your oil in your cast iron spit and hot before you add your eggs, because that creates a much better barrier. The other thing is, do not salt your eggs before they are all done. When you salt them, it breaks down the structure of the eggs and makes them stick to the surface of the pan. So now I'm going to show you how I clean my cast irons after we make scrambled eggs in them. So I just use a stainless steel sponge, and I will link this sponge in the description for you. And it's real easy to see the difference between the two pans, because the one that we resurfaced is much lighter, almost silver in appearance, but it will get darker as all those cracks and crevices fill in with fat and grease. So I'm just going to put a tiny bit of lard into my warm pan. And then we are going to rub it all over that pan while the pan is still warm. And then we're going to store it, and it's going to be ready for using the next time. And then I'm going to clean this one up really good and prepare it for Elvin and his little angle grinder. And he is going to resurface this pan, and I'm going to get it all seasoned and ready for my daughter to use. I hear so many people talk about all the cans and can't do's of cast iron, and you can't do this and you can't do that, and it almost all comes from the generation of people that have been raised with a Teflon or coated nonstick pans. Let me tell you, cast iron is not fragile like that. Cast iron can take all kinds of abuse, and you can bring them back to life. That resurfacing that you saw Elvin do, you can do that with old rusty pans and bring them to life just like new again. A very common one is you can't cook tomato products in cast iron. Yes, you can. Here's what happens. Tomatoes are acidic, and the acid cuts through the grease that has soaked into all those cracks and crevices, and it pulls it out. That's all that happens, not always lost. You know how to re-season your cast iron. Just wipe it all down with lard, put it upside down in your oven, and re-season it. Or cook something fun like bacon in it, that re-seasons it too. The other thing that I often hear is you cannot use dish soap on your cast iron. Here's why people say that. Dish soap is a degreaser. Degreaser will do the same thing that your acid products do, and it will pull grease and fat out of those little crevices and creases in your cast iron, and you will have to re-season it. So there's not a can and can't do with cast iron. It's just in knowing, if you know how to re-season it or not. Well, that brings us to the end of this cast iron video. Please leave us comments. Let us know what you thought. And if you have any questions, Elvin and I will both be able to answer them. And I hope that this video inspires those of you who were like me and put their cast iron aside because you couldn't make it work the way you wanted. I hope that this inspires you to get them out, resurface them, and fall in love with your cast iron. So we have been getting ready for Christmas. I've not really done any Christmas baking yet, but I'm excited to get to that next. We have done a whole lot more socializing than we normally do. We will be back here next week with some Christmas baking. I don't know yet what it will be, but I will be in the kitchen, and it will be a recipe of some sort.